Boxing philosophy is about understanding. For example, how does Holyfield land his left hook? How does Canelo land his left hook to the body? And who owns the best jab in boxing? These questions, they open doors. They push us to explore the different elements of the sport, whether it's the punches, the timing, the rhythm. And there are also less visible layers, whether it's the glove size, the contracts, the psychology of victory, the psychology of defeat, and the unique environment that each trainer builds. Question: what truly makes a great trainer? Is it the strategy that they design, or is it the culture that they create in the gym? Boxing philosophy is about asking sharp questions, even when there are no clear answers. Because in the search for answers, understanding grows. So I want to build on this idea. I really want to build on this idea and just elaborate a little bit more, because I feel like they're lying to you when they say boxing is dying. As we've stated, what does dying mean? Because in the boxing ecosystem, we have many different big platforms, whether it's dazn, whether it's Netflix, whether it's Matchroom, then we've got IVB Boxing, Showtime, etc. And what does that mean? Well, in a simple sense, what it means is that the boxing jungle isn't just here, figuratively speaking. The boxing jungle has expanded. Let's talk about it from a dazn perspective. If you look at the Chris Eubank Jr. Conor Benn fight, that had 620,000 buys. That's a revenue through the pay-per-view of approximately 12.3 million. That hardly sounds like boxing is dying from that perspective. Then you have the Tyson Fury Usyk fight, and that had 1.5 million buys. That's over $50 million. Huge, absolutely huge event. And then you have the Canelo versus Triple G, the trilogy, and that did 1.6 million pay-per-view buys and generated 58 million in pay-per-view revenue. The reason why the revenue is so different here is because the actual price of the pay-per-view here was more expensive, I believe. I believe it was up to $59. So if boxing is dying, how is boxing generating those type of numbers? Because pay-per-view buys is huge amounts of interest. For you to spend £20 on an event means that you have an investment into that event. You are interested in purchasing that event, particularly in a time of economic turmoil. And when you look at dazn as a company, and admittedly, dazn is not just boxing, it's an accumulation of sports, but dazn is a £10 billion company, I believe. And part of that is boxing revenue. And I would say that dazn is one of the biggest lions in the boxing jungle. It has collaborations with other big players in the game like Matchroom, Golden Boy, and Queensberry. So we can see that the boxing ecosystem is getting bigger, and dazn is a massive part. dazn is a massive part of that boxing ecosystem. And they have an imprint in all the boxing revenues or all the different boxing paths, whether it's USA, Britain, Japan, etc. And when we talk about dazn, I believe it was a £7 billion investment by a billionaire. And dazn allegedly has, it had a revenue growth of like 11% in 2024. So, and even if you look at the actual business of dazn, it actually now has a new tier model, which is called the ultimate tier subscription model. And basically what that is that if you purchase the ultimate tier subscription, you get the pay-per-views included. So as I've stated, the boxing jungle of dazn is expanding because the boxing jungle is expanding and the dazn boxing jungle is expanding. So what we're seeing is that boxing is evolving. There's more money, more cultural impact, more entertainment. And as we can see within the dazn element, there's even that new feature. And then we've got new contenders to the throne or new people in the jungle. Enter Netflix. Obviously, Netflix on its own is a massive entity, but they are new contenders and they don't have the weekly boxing ecosystem that dazn have. They don't have that. And they do something rather different. What Netflix do, they have singular massive events. So they have these events that are huge and they don't charge a pay-per-view subscription, their business model is that, you pay for Netflix and then you're automatically eligible for the boxing events. So how big are these events? Well, if you look at the Mike Tyson-Jake Paul fight, that was an event that was watched by over 60 million households, and it had a live gate of 18.1 million, with 72,000 fans in attendance at the actual match. So this is a culturally massive event. Now, of course, when you have these type of fights, you have massive brands. You have the giant of Netflix, and then you have the brand of Mike Tyson, which is like a 30-year-old brand. So, so many generations are interested in Mike Tyson, whether it was the generation in the 90s that saw him knock out various opponents, or, even today, you have Mike Tyson as part of the algorithm with his podcast. Mike Tyson, obviously previously known as the baddest man in the planet, he is such a massive brand. So when you pair Netflix with Mike Tyson and then with Jake Paul, who's massively in the algorithm, you obviously have this massive event. And 60 million viewers would tell me that those brands are massive, but ultimately boxing is very much alive in the minds of the people. Of course, we can question the credibility of the match. That's a different argument. Clearly, Mike Tyson is a very credible brand, but he's nearing 60. Mike Tyson in his 20s or in his 30s or even in his 40s, this would have been a mismatch. But the context of this fight is slightly problematic when we're talking about the credibility of boxing. But then you've got the Canelo-Crawford fight. Both elite fighters. Canelo has that massive audience, global superstar, and then you had Crawford, who has a big following in America. And that was watched by 41 million people, and the live gate for that was very significant. It was 47 million. So what does this mean? It means that people are tuning into boxing. And Netflix are creating matches, they're creating boxing matches that have massive cultural influence. And to me, that would indicate that boxing is growing exponentially. And then we have different boxing ecosystems like Misfits, and you have the YouTube influencer ecosystem. And this is, when we talk about Misfits, you have the biggest event on Misfits, which was the KSI Tommy Fury fight. Tommy Fury is a professional fighter, and obviously KSI, I would classify as a YouTube fighter, but he's a YouTube fighter. He's one of the more premium YouTube fighters. He takes the sport very seriously. This had, I believe, 1.3 million pay-per-view buys, so it brought in a lot of money. And the thing is with Misfits, this is bringing boxing to the YouTube social media community. So again, it's part of expanding boxing. And admittedly, Misfits is less technical. It's less technical than the professionals, and there's more of a focus on entertainment, on drama and hype to generate revenue. Now, in professional boxing, you have drama to generate revenue, but also you have boxers that have had, in some cases over a decade of guidance, over a decade of mentorship. These influencer fighters, some of these have just come into the ring and they've only had maybe a 6-week, 12-week camp. Of course, now, because Misfits has been going for a couple of years, you have more seasoned competition. And of course, and I understand this, there has been criticisms of the credibility of Misfits. But Misfits, you could either say it's a part of the boxing jungle or it's a separate part of the jungle. It's a segment in the jungle. And I think a legitimate criticism here is boxing being compromised? So if we pull out the metrics that boxing is growing, we could say yes. But is it being compromised? And I would say if you look at, say, the Bivol Butterbeer fights, both of those fights, high elite fights, the Inoue fights, they were fights on an elite level. The Crawford fights, they're fights on an elite level. And the Usyk fights, I don't know how compelling that argument is. Yes, you have less technical fights, which focus on entertainment, but you still have this elite level of boxing. And this, to me, suggests that boxing is far from dying. So why? Why Usyk versus Wilder is a huge mistake. Why? Now, if Usyk gets caught and beaten by Wilder, that would be unbelievable. It would be a shock to the boxing ecosystem. Put it this way, Wilder has everything to gain and Usyk has everything to lose. That to me is not a good negotiating thing. Let me rephrase that. It's good for negotiating a favorable position, but it's not good in terms of the desired outcome. Because if you make a mistake, you lose so much. And if Wilder makes a mistake, well, he was supposed to lose. So there's a lot at stake for Usyk in this one. And Wilder, let's be honest, I know people say they don't want to see the fight, but clearly Wilder has a brand. Wilder is part of the algorithm. Look at the numbers for the Tyson Fury fight. So objectively, when people say that people are not interested in Wilder, that is objectively not true. The data and the investment shows otherwise. But even though we can concede that Wilder has a brand, he clearly does not have momentum. And the reason why he does not have momentum is because he has been losing. He obviously lost to Fury. No shame in losing to Fury. But then he had consecutive losses. He had the loss to Zhang. That was a devastating loss. And then he had the loss to Parker. The loss to Parker wasn't devastating like a knockout, but it was a negative loss because he did not roll the dice when the fight clearly wasn't going his way. So we can establish that Wilder would be a huge underdog in this fight. But then there's interesting questions like, how motivated will Usyk be in this fight? And will Wilder have huge motivation to burst back on the scene? Or is this simply a money play? Who knows? And then we have the economics of the fight. I believe it's the IVP, a live sports boxing entertainment company, which is a privately held company that has shown interest. They have no public valuations, earnings, or assets, but clearly they have substantial investment. And they have shown interest for the fight. And I've heard the date of July the 11th. Now, their operation would be uniquely different to dazn and to Netflix. Why is that? Well, their operation would be based upon, I believe, a YouTube pay-per-view, which could be like a free stream, but you might get paid premium access, or it could be a YouTube pay-per-view event. Now, as they would want to go for an open-air event, this would be interesting because open-air events, you have the advantages of the atmosphere. Think of Anthony Joshua, Vladimir Klitschko. What a massive fight that was. But then you have the risk of the weather if it rains, and it's very expensive to run. So there's pros and there's cons to that. But when we look at the facts of the IVB involvement, the facts is that there are no confirmed contracts, there are no official agreements. So IVB's involvement right now is promotional and speculative. But there are discussions. So there might be some informal negotiations. And in this fight, we have massive money implications and a cultural implication because both Usyk and Deontay Wilder are a massive part of the algorithm. And if you're part of the algorithm, you have marketing power. If this fight is negotiated, my question would be, how will boxing fans and how will casual fans think about this fight? Let's start off with boxing fans. I think boxing fans are not particularly interested in this fight today. Maybe 5 years ago, or when Deontay Wilder was a champion, they would have been very interested. But I think the boxing fan is less interested. However, I think the casual fan is probably more interested because they would link Deontay Wilder to his knockouts as opposed to his lack of momentum. So the fighting, from the boxing fan perspective, the fight has lost its sizzle because of Wilder's losing streak. But from the casual fan's perspective, maybe you can create a sizzle because Deontay Wilder does have that allure of being a knockout artist. And then you have other questions like from the psychological perspective, and we know that psychology is so important in boxing. Is Wilder psychologically a beaten fighter? Maybe only he knows that question or knows the answer to that question, or maybe he doesn't know the answer to that question. And again, motivation is a massive factor of boxing, a massive factor at sports at the elite level. Will Usyk be undermotivated? Will Usyk be able to push himself in camp to be the best version of himself? Will Wilder come in with some new fire in his belly? Will he come into this and approach this in a different way? Will he be like a new fighter? I mean, there's rumors that he's had some problems in his personal life, and will that light up a new fire, a new passion, a new enthusiasm, a new desire that would make him a very dangerous fighter? This is yet to be seen, and the evidence may suggest no. But often in life, unusual things can happen. So maybe Deontay Wilder does find that flame. Maybe he does get involved in a camp that brings out the best version of him. Maybe he's given a strategy that can be effective against Usyk. These are possibilities. They're definitely not absolutes, but they are possibilities. And regardless of what happens in this fight, if it is negotiated, it's important to understand the following. Usyk is a legend. Regardless, he is loved by his people. He is adored by his people, but he's also loved globally. He has respect from his people and he has respect around the world. He has established dominance in the heavyweight division and previous to that, the cruiserweight division. And the rematch against Daniel Dubois, a great spectacle in front of 90,000 people. Think of that. Visualize that. 90,000 people cheering. That knockout, to me, was a perfect time to retire. And it makes me think of the power of decisions, or the power of the right decision. Specifically, when is the right time to retire? Because this is a hard thing to measure. I would say Floyd Mayweather made a good decision. I would say Crawford made a good decision. Calzaghe made the decision. They made the right decision on when to retire. But when I think of boxing and when I think of continuing, you have to ask yourself the purpose. The purpose is important. Many people, when they talk about boxing, they talk about what happens in the ring, or some talk about the business of boxing, but what about the purpose? Now, psychiatrist Viktor Frankl once said, life is never made unbearable by circumstances, but by a lack of purpose. End of quote. So by that metric, purpose is not just important, it's the most important thing. From a Usyk perspective, what's the purpose? From a Deontay Wilder perspective, what's the purpose? For Usyk, is this fight for him? Is this fight for his people? Or is it for the world? Or is it a combination of all three? His impact, and when I say him, I'm referring to Usyk, his impact has been felt by the world. But can it be expanded? And if it can be expanded, does Usyk expand his cultural impact by still competing in the ring? Or is there another journey for him? Maybe it could be, I heard a rumor of him building a boxing academy. Or is there another way of building a promotional company or becoming a huge influence in the boxing infrastructure? But I sincerely hope that when Usyk is making his decisions, that it's not predicated on money, it's predicated on culture, and predicated on impact, and predicated on his purpose. And from an outsider looking in, he seems like an honest man. He seems like a man of integrity. So I'm sure that they're taking that into account. I guess you can never tell someone the right time to retire, because you could argue that only that person knows what's inside of them. But then it becomes a question of what's the ambition. But if the ambition is purpose, if the ambition is to be the greatest version of themselves, if the ambition is, for want of a better word, pure, then this could be a significant step forward. Or maybe we should ask the question, what is the significant step forward? Is the world of fight a significant step forward for Usyk's purpose? Or is his purpose and journey, is it now going to lead to somewhere else? Is it going to lead to that academy? Is it going to lead to him being part of boxing's infrastructure? I'm curious. And if this fight is successfully negotiated, even though people say that they're uninterested, I think the reality is that because of the branding of Wilder, the knockout artist, and the slight knockout opportunity that he has to win this fight, I'm sure that many people will tune in. And if the fight does happen, hopefully it's a great fight. Dubois versus Zhang. Someone is getting slept, the brutal truth. Let's be honest. If this fight happens, someone is surely getting knocked out or stopped. And what an exciting fight this would be. Now let's go and seek the different perspectives. So we've got Zhang's perspective and we've got Dubois' perspective. Let's start off with Zhang's perspective. From a Zhang perspective, you're fighting an opponent, which is Dubois, that suffered a devastating knockout, may have a lack of confidence and may have some psychological scars. So I can see how you could get confidence from that. From Dubois' perspective, you're fighting an opponent that suffered their first knockout defeat, has poor stamina, and is advanced in age. So I can see how Dubois would be confident there. Now, when we talk about Zhang, he hits exceptionally hard, and he's a very good counterpuncher. He's an underestimated counterpuncher. For a reference point of how hard he hits, look at what he did to Joy Joyce, who had a great chin, knocked him out. He knocked him out the second time and stopped him the first time. And equally, Dubois hits very hard. He has counterpunching skills. Check out the Anthony Joshua fight. And I think he has a significant speed advantage, probably has an advantage with regards to foot movement as well. Now, it's funny with Dubois. It's really funny with Dubois because people question his heart, but Dubois can show a lot of courage. For example, when he fought Filip Hrgović, how many times did he get hit with that right hand? I'm sure he got hit about 50 times with Filip Hrgovic's right hand. Now, some may say, how hard does Filip Hrgović hit? But however you look at it, Filip Hrgović hits hard enough. He can punch. And he hit Dubois over and over and over and over again. And Dubois just took it. He never went down. Clearly, he was hurt at times, but he was able to take the punches. So that's reference number one. Then reference number two, you had Miller. And Gerald Miller is a pressure fighter, dangerous fighter, was undefeated at the time. And he put you under pressure. And he was throwing big punches at Dubois, putting him under intense pressure, just constantly coming into punching range, taking his punches, taking his punches. But he stood that test and he stopped Miller. I think it was a great performance, a grade A performance. And he showed so much character and bravery. And against Anthony Joshua, even though he dominated that fight, Anthony Joshua had moments, particularly before he got knocked out. I think he hurt Daniel Dubois. And the intensity of the fight, the magnitude of the fight, the massive atmosphere, that would test anyone's character. And Dubois came through it with flying colors. But then you look at the Usyk fights. Look at the Usyk fight, and it seemed like his heart was not in it. Why? Maybe that's a little bit unfair. Maybe it's a little bit unfair because he went in there to win. There's no doubt about that. But he definitely, it felt at some points he got discouraged. Now, why is that? My theory would be that Daniel Dubois can take the punches, but he can't take the frustration. So when he starts missing punches or getting hit with counters or he can't figure out the puzzle, that's when the frustration sets in, and that's when he really starts to starts to falter. And then you got the Joey Joyce fight. And this was unfortunate for Dubois because there was no way to prepare for that Joey Joyce that he fought, because Joe Joyce is a pressure fighter who lacks speed and he's like a clubbing fighter. But in that fight, Joe Joyce tried to fight like Larry Holmes. Not that he can fight like Larry Holmes, but he just predominantly used his jab. And that puzzle that he set on Dubois simply could not solve the puzzle. Yes, he hit Joe Joyce with tremendous right hands, which Joe Joyce took, but it was the jab that, again, caused the frustration, and then you had the eye trouble, and then the fight was over. So it seems to me that if you can frustrate Dubois, you can break his heart by frustrating him. That seems to be the main premise. But if he can get his punches off, even if he's taking punches, he can be very heroic. So his heart is quite complicated. His bravery is complicated. He can be very brave, but he can also be discouraged. So here's the thing. Daniel Dubois against Filip Hrgović, adjusted. Daniel Dubois against Gerald Miller, adjusted. And he had that great performance against Anthony Joshua. But in the Usyk fights and in the Joe Joyce fights, there was an adjustment issue. So to me, it feels like if Daniel Dubois is getting momentum, if he's hitting you with the double jabs, the right uppercuts, the left hooks, the right hand, he is extremely dangerous. I would say against Anthony Joshua, he looked special. That right hand was vicious. That counter right hand was vicious. So it's like with Daniel Dubois, I feel like you've got to make it difficult for him. You've got to confuse him, frustrate him, and you can't let him build momentum. Now, from Zhang's perspective, I feel like you've got to establish the southpaw jab, because that's what Zhang has. He has that southpaw jab, and the punches come from different angles. You've got to establish that counter straight left. And the one thing that Zhang needs to work on is his pacing and the output of punches, because he's struggling in that area. Against Joe Joyce, his punch output was low. In his loss to Cabiao, his punch output was higher, but then it got lower, and then he got stopped by body punches. So for me, for Zhilei Zhang to win, he needs to control the distance. He needs to confuse Dubois, walk him into punches. And then I think that Zhang has a good opportunity, not only of winning the fight, but maybe getting a knockout. But from a Dubois perspective, if he can catch the counters, and particularly if he can start working the body, putting his head on Zhang's chest, utilizing the double jab, put punches together, then you could foresee a Daniel Dubois stoppage or knockout. But here's another question. And this, I think, is a really good question. How good is Zhang and how good is Dubois? Are they world level? Clearly, Dubois was world level. He was world level. Is he still world level? Zhilei Zhang looked like $1 million against Deontay Wilder. But does he still have that confidence? And does he still have that punch resistance? Now, again, Dubois' resume under Don Charles was exceptional. Gerald Miller, Filip Hrgović, Anthony Joshua. But now I believe, I hope I'm not mistaken here, I believe he's with Tony Sims, really good trainer, but will Tony Sims be able to bring Dubois back to that level? And then we have this complication of the relationship with the father. And the question is it a positive relationship? Is it a negative relationship? I feel like the media are trying to purport that it's a negative relationship, but I feel like that's a bit of an intellectually lazy narrative, because clearly the father's involvement helps Dubois psychologically. That's probably really important for his motivation and for his spirit. So that's really important. So there's definitely a net positive for his father being involved. Now, the negative is theoretical. So the negative would be if he interferes negatively with camp. Notice the wording, if he interferes negatively. Of course he's going to interfere in camp because it's his son. He has a massive investment for, because he wants the best for his son. But is that interference positive? We don't know. We're not behind closed doors. And will Dubois' lack of independence, again, that's an assumption, will his lack of independence be his undoing? Now, French philosopher Sartre states, quote, "We are our choices," end of quote. And I wonder, the choice to get rid of Don Charles, how will that play out? Will that be positive? Will it be negative? And will the choice, or the perceived choice, of not being loyal to a trainer that got him results, will that play out in a positive way? How will the Tony Sims relationship play out? And if he does fight Zhang, is this a good option? Is this the ideal fight for him right now? Now again, let's shift to Zhang's perspective. From a Zhang perspective, if you're in his corner, you wonder, can he endure the body shots? Can he increase the punch output? And can he deal with Daniel Dubois' experience? And these are critical things, because Zhang really struggled with the body punching from Caballel. And his punch output and his stamina is an issue. He needs to go back to the drawing board and he needs to address that. Maybe he needs to come in lighter, but he needs to not come in too light, but he needs to maybe come in lighter to be able to maintain a better punch output. These are things that can be corrected in camp. Now, here's an important thing to recognize. The win for either one of them, a win for either Dubois or Zhang, it puts them in title contention. And if they can get a viral moment like a knockout, they're right back up there. They're right back up there. Now, here's the objective reality. From my understanding, at the time of writing, the fight is not finalized, but there is negotiation and there is intent to make the fight happen. Now, my final point would be this. If I was Dubois, I would be negotiating for a bigger purse split. This is based on the premise that you say Dubois is the bigger brand. Obviously, Zhang's camp would argue otherwise, but I would negotiate for a bigger purse split. I think he should go for a bigger ring because movement could be essential for Dubois. But I can understand the notion of wanting a smaller ring so that Zhang can't use it. But I think Dubois would want a bigger ring so he can use his foot speed. I think a UK venue would be ideal. So it'd either be a UK venue or a neutral venue. And I think I would contemplate negotiating bigger gloves to neutralize the power of Zhang. Because Zhang's big aspect is his punching power. Now, of course, if you neutralize Zhang's punching power, bigger gloves, you also neutralize your punching power and speed. So that's something to consider. So there's interesting variables at the negotiation table, but this is potentially a great fight. I mean, I would really be curious to see who would win this fight. And I think, this is one of those fights where winner takes all. So hopefully this fight comes into play. The problem with Jarrell Miller that no one is talking about. Let's talk about it. Now let's go back because at one point, Jarrell Miller had serious momentum in the ring and outside the ring. He had serious momentum. He had work rate, he had power, and he had intensity. And outside the ring, and remember in boxing, it's important what you do in the ring, but it's also important what you do outside the ring. He was also fantastic at marketing. Some may say like a marketing genius. He understood the power of words and how market can attract premium opposition. Then, after building that momentum and having stoppages and putting on impressive performances and, having loads of engagement with the media, he was scheduled to fight AJ, Anthony Joshua. At this point, the train of momentum was going forward and forward, and Miller had an economic opportunity, a cultural opportunity, and an opportunity to reach greatness, an opportunity to go to the mountaintop. And allegedly, on the Gloves Are Off, where, the Gloves Are Off are like build-up shows for the fights, Apparently, Jerome Miller did a rap. He did some type of rap battle, or he did what people would call spit a verse, which basically means say a rap. And this, allegedly, he dominated that Gloves Are Off. And that domination, part of that domination was predicated around this freestyle that he said. And unfortunately, that never came out. But again, this was a huge platform for Gerald Miller, a huge platform. And he was performing, he was giving the people what they wanted. People want intense rivalries and they want entertainment. And he was ticking those boxes. But then came the suspension. Now, we're not going to focus on that, because I don't want to focus too much on that. But there was other problems, and this is what people aren't talking about. There was the issues with the Salita promotions, the issue with the promoter. Then there was the collapse of the Derek Chisora fight. This would have been huge in Britain because Derek Chisora is a British brand, and they both know how to market. Then there was the cancellation of the Fabio Ward fight, and this would have been a great fight. Unfortunately, Miller had to withdraw due to a shoulder injury. I'm not sure which shoulder it was, but he had to withdraw from the fight. This again was disappointing because they were building up the fight effectively. And he was the driving force behind the marketing of that fight. And then there was the Dubois fight. And, that wasn't necessarily a bad performance, but his condition against Dubois, 333 pounds. 333 pounds. That is absolutely massive. This, I believe, affected his punch output and his foot speed. That's not to take anything away from Dubois. It was an amazing performance by Dubois. But I think he compromised his own performance. Miller compromised his performance with putting on that weight. Now, the way I look at it, because of his mouth, and more importantly, because of his fighting ability, Jerome Miller, he is like a potential gold mine. He really is. So the question becomes this. From my perspective, here's the question. What does Miller need to do to get back? What does he need to do to get back into contention? Well, I would say he needs to do two things. He needs to get back onto the media circuit, and he definitely needs to get back into the gym. He needs to get not just in shape, but he needs to get in fighting shape. He has a manager, but no promoter. This is a problem. He needs to develop relationships to get the big fights. Now, when you don't have a promoter, why is this a problem? Well, no promoter, it's hard to get pay-per-view, it's hard to get international shows, and you have weaker negotiation power. So he needs to get an effective promoter. And he needs a big win, and he really needs to get that machine going again. Now, remember, that media machine, he had it. He really had it, but he needs to get it going again. And also, he needs to get a strong trainer to get him into fighting shape. He needs a trainer to give him that fighting environment to be able for him to become the best version of himself. So he needs a big fight. So let's look at, I was thinking about this. What would be the biggest fights for Miller right now? And I narrowed it down to, I think, 3 people. I think the Derek Chisora fight, that's still a big fight. I guess the realism of making that fight is probably medium, and the money would be good. Obviously, the risk would be Derek Chisora's right hand. Derek Chisora's got a powerful right hand. He throws it nice on the counter, and he's a minimal target. That's an interesting style fight, but it would be an entertaining fight. I think everyone would want to see that fight. Then you have the Deontay Wilder fight. I guess the realism of that is probably medium to low. The money would be high, and the risk there is obviously Wilder's right hand. Wilder is still a very hard power puncher. But this fight would be significant because there's a strong narrative between the two. There's history. So you'd be able to build the beef because it's the premise of this fight is built on genuine hostility towards each other. And that would be, again, a good fight. And then you have the Zhilei Zhang, and I guess the realism here is maybe medium. The money would be good because Zhang is an international brand. And the risk would be Zhang's power. Zhang has phenomenal power, particularly that straight left. He can really hurt you with that straight left. Check out the Joseph Parker fight. He threw the left. He just threw it really short, and he put Parker on the floor. Of course, Parker went on to win the fight. But every time Zhang hit Parker, Parker had a noticeable reaction, and Parker has good punch resistance. So these would be really good fights, and these fights would be fan-friendly. They would build the brand, and if he was to get a knockout, he would build a virality which would attract, a potential world championship fight. But I feel like with Gerald Miller, he needs to work on himself. He needs to work on himself. He needs to get in shape. He needs to get in fighting shape. And maybe more importantly, he needs to get around the right people. I believe the great fighters, generally speaking, are around a great environment. And it seems that there's some issues there. Another fight that I would add to that list is Fabio Wardley. That would be a great fight. Again, Gerald Miller would be the one doing the marketing. He would be the one doing the marketing, but the actual fight would be explosive. Could Gerald Miller take Fabio Wardley's power? And if he can't, then that could be a sensational knockout for Fabio Wardley. But if he could take his power, and if he could put Fabio Wardley under pressure, then you would have a truly, that could be an explosive fight. It could be an explosively short fight, or it could be a brutal, grueling, long fight. I think the casual fans would get behind that one, especially with Miller's ability to build fights. Again, I think Miller needs to look at the mirror and look at himself. He needs to develop relationships with elite people in the game. And I was thinking about this, and the philosopher Aristotle states that excellence is not an act, it's a habit. And I feel like for Miller to resurrect his career, he needs to show discipline and he needs to show courage to bring his career back to where it was. And I would say ultimately that this is a difficult task. It is a difficult task. It won't be easy. There's lots of barriers to overcome, and he needs to almost start again. But even though it may be a difficult task, if he shows bravery, if he shows courage, if he shows habit, if he's able to get back into fighting shape, if he's able to rebuild that relationship with the media, if he's able to cultivate and really build his image within the public sphere, then it's a difficult task, but it's definitely not an impossible task.